Hello, grade 11 advanced students. We continue the explanation of chapter 1, and today our lesson is about photosynthesis. So we're going to have an overview of photosynthesis, and the things that we're going to discuss in this lesson are we're going to look at what photosynthesis is, all right? We're going to refresh our memory about it. Then we're going to look at the two phases of photosynthesis, and we're going to explain the electron transport and the Kelvin cycle. Then we'll talk about the alternative ways that, alternative pathways for photosynthesis. Right, so some of the essential questions that we're looking at are, what are the two phases of photosynthesis? Explain the function of chloroplasts during the light reactions, and describe the diagram of the electron transport. A review of vocabulary is carbohydrate. So we took a vocabulary before, and that's carbohydrate. We're just going to review what carbohydrates are. They are an organic compound containing only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. I'm pretty sure we all know what carbohydrates are. So, if we remember, we said that most autotrophs, including plants, make organic compounds such as sugars by a process called photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, recall that photosynthesis is a process by which light energy is converted into chemical energy. So we know that photosynthesis converts it converts light energy from the sun into chemical energy. We have the overall equation for photosynthesis. I'm not sure if it is compulsory to memorize it, but I'm pretty sure we are all familiar with it. We said that the reactants for photosynthesis were carbon dioxide, and we used 6 carbon dioxide molecules, 6 water molecules, with light, of course, and that gives us the product, which is 1 molecule of glucose. This is the molecular formula for glucose, and 6 oxygen molecules. Now, photosynthesis occurs in 2 phases, all right? So we have photosynthesis, and it occurs in 2 phases. The location of these phases is in the figure below, and I'll just show it to you in a second. But phase 1 is called the light-dependent phase. The light-dependent phase, or the light-dependent reaction, depends on light. When we say light-dependent, it means needs light. لما نقول light dependent، لما الاشي يكون dependent معناته يحتاج إلى هذا الشيء. إذن في الفيز الأول نحن نحتاج للضوء. We need light, right? That's why it's called light dependent reaction. What happens in the light dependent reactions? This is just a brief summary, just a brief collection of ideas, okay? What happens in the light dependent reaction? Light energy is absorbed, so light is absorbed. And then it is converted into chemical energy in the form of ATP, and we discussed ATP last lesson. So it's in the form of ATP and NADPH, and we are going to know what NADPH is in a moment when we go into detail in this process. Now, what else do we need to know about the light-dependent reaction? We need to know where it happens. Where is the light-dependent reaction happening? If we look at the figure here, photosynthesis occurs in the pigmented organelles, and they are called chloroplasts. So where does this whole process happen? The whole process, not just the light-dependent reaction. The whole process happens in an organelle called the chloroplast. Where does the first part take place, or the first phase? It takes place in the thylakoid, and the second phase takes place in the stroma, and we are going to discuss all of this in detail in a moment. Now, the second phase of photosynthesis is called the light independent phase. So when I say something is independent, لما أقول إنه الشيء independent معناته لا يحتاج لهذا الشيء. When I say something is independent, that means it doesn't need this thing. So in the second phase, we do not need light. What happens in phase 2? The ATP and NADH that was formed in phase 1 are used to make, so these two, ATP and NADH, are used in the light independent reaction to create glucose. Right, to create glucose. Now, once glucose is produced, it can be joined to other simple sugars. So, what did we get here? Glucose is a simple sugar. Glucose is a simple sugar, and it can be joined to other simple sugars to form larger molecules. These larger molecules are complex carbohydrates. An example is starch. Okay? Now, if you recall from the last chapters, or not last chapters, but from our previous knowledge, we know that carbohydrates are composed of repeating units of small organic molecules that we discussed before. Now, the end product of photosynthesis, which is glucose. So what is the end product of photosynthesis? End product of photosynthesis is glucose. So glucose can also be used to make other organic molecules like proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. So what can glucose be used to make? It can join other simple sugars and create complex carbohydrates, or it can be used to make protein, lipids, and nucleic acids. Right, so we got a little bit of an overview of photosynthesis, of the phases. So let's discuss phase 1 in detail, which is the light reaction. So let's look at phase 1, which is the light reaction. Now, the absorption of light is the first step in photosynthesis. So absorption of light is the first step of photosynthesis. What's the first step of photosynthesis? Step number 1 is absorption of light. Now, plants have these special organelles to capture light energy, and we said those special organelles are chloroplasts. These special organelles are, we discussed earlier, chloroplasts. And we'll learn more about chloroplasts in a minute. So, once the energy is captured, two energy molecules, NADPH and ATP are produced in the light independent reaction. So, what is very important for you to know in photosynthesis and in cellular respiration when we take it is, what are my reactants? Okay, what is the purpose of this phase? What do I have and what do I produce? What is my end product? These are the most important things that you should know. All right, let us move on to chloroplasts. So chloroplasts are large organelles. Okay, these large organelles that capture light energy in photosynthesis. So if someone says, what is the function of chloroplasts in photosynthesis? It is to capture light energy. Now, in plants, chloroplasts are mainly in the cells of the leaves, right? And we'll know more about that later, but we know that the leaves are green. Okay, and this will have this little amount of information will make sense in a minute. But in most plants, okay, the chloroplasts are found mainly in the leaves of the plants. Okay, chloroplasts are. It's very important for you to know the description of chloroplasts. So what do chloroplasts look like? What is their description? They are disc-shaped organelles. So I'll just go back to the photo here. If you can see, this is the chloroplasts, and it looks like a disc, right? Like that. It looks like a disc. This is it from the inside, but from the outside, it looks like a disc, right? A round disc. Almost round disc. It contains two main components essential to photosynthesis. So what do we know about chloroplasts so far? They capture light energy, they are disc-shaped organelles, and they are mainly found in the cells of leaves. So write those notes down because these are important to know. Then what do we have? We have two main components that are essential to photosynthesis in these organelles. What are they? The first component that we're going to talk about is the thylakoid, and I'll show you the picture of the thylakoid. If you look here, this is the thylakoid, and then we'll know later that these stacks are called grana. One is called granum, multiple of them are called grana. Now, thylakoids are flattened sac-like membranes. It is very important, كتير مهم تفرقوا بين the description of the components and the organelles. So, I'll write them down for you. I think that's better. So, chloroplast is disc-shaped. It is an organelle. Its function in photosynthesis is to capture light energy. Or we'll write capture better. It will capture light energy. Okay? And they have two main components. So we have two main components inside the chloroplasts. Inside the chloroplast, we have two main components. What are they? The first one we said is the thylakoid. Tamam? Thylakoids are what? Flattened, sac-like. They look like a sac. Sac-like membranes. And they are arranged in stacks. They are arranged in stacks, okay? So those are thylakoids. These stacks that the thylakoids are in are called grana. Light-dependent reaction take place within the thylakoid. So thylakoid is where is the place or the location of phase 1, which is the light-dependent reaction. Phase 1 happens in the thylakoid. And we said that thylakoids are arranged in stacks, and these stacks are called grana. Okay? Now, the second important component is called the stroma. The stroma is the fluid filled space that is outside the grana. So it is outside of the thylakoid. It is outside the stacks of the thylakoid. Okay, it is in the membrane of the chloroplast. Okay, this is the location of the light-independent reaction in phase 2 of photosynthesis. So let's just have a look here. This is one thylakoid. These stacks are called grana because we have many of them. If it's just one, then it's called a granum. This is the location of phase 1, as you can see, inside of the thylakoids. And then here, the stroma, as you can see, it is the fluid-filled space outside of the grana, right? Outside of the thylakoids, okay? So let's just continue our little note map here. We said the second most important component is the stroma. And the stroma is the place for phase 2, right? And it is a fluid space, a fluid-filled space outside the grana. Okay? All right. And that is it for the chloroplast. Now, we have pigments, something called pigments. Let's look at pigments for a little bit. So pigments are light-absorbing colored molecules. They are light-absorbing colored molecules. They're called pigments. Where are they found? It's very important. Pigments are light-absorbing colored molecules. Think about it for a minute. If they're light absorbing, when do I need them? I need them in phase 1, the light dependent reaction. And where does the light dependent reaction take place? You guessed it, in the thylakoid. So pigments are light absorbing colored molecules, and they are found in the thylakoid membranes of the chloroplast. They are found in the thylakoid membrane. Different pigments absorb specific wavelengths of light. So let's add to our little map sheet here. We know that inside the thylakoid we have pigments. Okay, we have pigments inside of the thylakoid. These pigments are light absorbing colored molecules. Okay, light absorbing colored molecules. They are found in the thylakoid, as we said, and what we need to know is that different pigments absorb specific wavelengths of light, and we'll look at this in this figure right here. So if we can see here, they've listed for us 3 pigments. Okay, and they've given us the absorption spectra of photosynthetic pigments. Right, let's find out more about these pigments. Let's learn about these pigments first before we talk about their wavelengths and when they absorb and what do they absorb and what do they reflect. And then I'll teach you how to read this graph. So if they do ask you anything about it in the exam, you do understand how to solve it. So the major light-absorbing pigment in plants are chlorophylls. So, what is the major light-absorbing pigment? Major يعني the biggest or the most abundant. أكتر إشي موجود. إيش أشهر pigment عندي إياها؟ Chlorophyll. تمام؟ That's the name of the pigment. Chlorophyll. There are several types and أكتر من نوع من الchlorophyll. Most common two types of chlorophyll are chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. أسهل من هيك أسامي ما في. The structure of chlorophyll can differ from one molecule to another, enabling distinct chlorophyll molecules to absorb light at unique areas of the visible spectrum. معناته كل chlorophyll إله الألوان المعينة اللي هو بمتصها. تمام؟ In general, هلا we're talking in general, chlorophyll absorb most strongly in the violet blue region of the visible light. معناته when the sun hits the plant, the chlorophyll will absorb violet green light. It will absorb violet blue light. It will absorb in the violet blue region of the visible spectrum. تمام? This is the absorption. Absorb in the violet blue region of the visible light spectrum. It will reflect light in the green region of the spectrum. So what do I need to know? Chlorophyll, we got two main types, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. What the chlorophyll molecule absorbs, what light depends on the molecule, but in general, they will absorb يعني يمتص. They will absorb in the violet, blue region. They will reflect. When we say reflect, يعني what we see. What we see. If you remember, لما تطلعوا على leaves of plants, most of them are green. That is because the chlorophyll reflects green. It reflects green. This is why plant parts that contain chlorophyll appear green to the human eye. So let's look here at this graph. Let me explain chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, and then I'll explain carotenoids when we get to them. So chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B that we just discussed. We said they will absorb in the wavelengths of blue, violet, and blue. So that is around right here. I could say from around 400 to 500. Around right here. That is probably where the absorption mostly is. And we said it will reflect in the green regions, which is right here. Now I want to explain to you how to read this graph. First thing, on the x-axis you have the wavelength. This basically means you have the color. Okay, so عندنا هون على x-axis the colors. Okay, violet, blue, green, yellow, red. That's what's on the x-axis, the wavelengths of light. Okay, what do we have? And you have to be very careful on what it says here. Very careful. This is the percentage of light absorbed. Percentage of light absorbed. كم من الضوء تم امتصاصه. تمام؟ هذا معناه الواي اكسس. تمام؟ طيب إذا هذا معناته إنه أنا كم امتصيت من الضوء. So that means لما يكون عندي graph، يعني لما يكون عندي percent and I have like a graph and I have a hill and all of this, that means I have absorption of light. If I have a straight line, that means I have no absorption of light because there is nothing on the y-axis. Does that make sense? It can also help you if you write down that we reflect green and we will absorb violet and blue. So that can help you to keep a clear head when you're looking at this graph. So again, I will say the y-axis gives you light absorption. امتصاص الضوء. معناته إذا أنا ما عندي امتصاص هيكون عندي a straight line on the graph. So let's check. For chlorophyll A, the question that might appear is, what are the wavelengths of light that chlorophyll A absorbs? When you get this question, you will go to chlorophyll A. You will see here, where is chlorophyll A? Chlorophyll A is the white dotted line. You'll go to chlorophyll A. I have, when you reach a straight line, that's when you'll stop. Tamam? So here I have things on the y-axis here. I have. Here, it stops. Right at the 450 wavelength, it becomes straight. Right? It starts to become straight. If you can see here we still have some, but once we reach 500, the moment we reach 500, it is straight on the x-axis. And then it slowly starts to go up again, but that we don't mind about. So what we're looking at here, or what we can see here or tell here, is that light is absorbed by chlorophyll A. Light is absorbed from around 400 to 450 wavelengths. All of this, we have action on the Y, right? I have a number on the Y. Once the number on the Y is 0, once it's 0, then I know it is not being absorbed. So from around 400 to around 500, let's say 400 to 500 wavelength, I have absorption of light by chlorophyll A. From 500 to maybe around 550, we have reflection of light. You might say, how do you know it is reflected at this wavelength? Well, if you look here, it is straight 0. So 0% is absorbed. If 0% is absorbed, that means it is reflected. Okay, same thing goes for chlorophyll B. Okay, that's the same idea. Whereas if it said here light reflected, then on the y-axis, if we do have numbers on the y-axis, that means this light is being reflected. And if I have that as 0, that means no light is being reflected. So if we imagine that this was percent of reflection, what would this graph look like for chlorophyll A? It's going to be the opposite, because before, when it was absorbed, I had action here on the Y because this was absorption, right? But now reflection. So anything that is being absorbed will be a 0. So right here, we absorb on the light, on the violet and blue, which means we do not reflect it. And then as soon as we start getting to the green, we reflect green, okay? So that's what the graph would look like for a reflect graph. So just make sure you read this. And now you understand how to read this graph, or how to understand this graph. Okay, and that is it for the first part of the lesson. In the next part, we are going to discuss electron transport. In fact, just before we move on, I would like to touch on carotenoids. Okay, so we'll just discuss what carotenoids are, and that'll be it for this part of the lesson. It is good to mention that the colorful pigments found in leaves of the trees differ in their ability to absorb specific wavelengths, as we have discussed. Okay, so let's look at carotenoids. Now, in addition to chlorophylls, most photosynthetic organisms contain accessory pigments. In addition, so I have chlorophylls plus accessory pigments. They allow plants to trap additional light energy from other areas of the visible spectrum, right? We know that the chlorophyll will take only blue, will absorb only blue and violet. So accessory pigments allow for other colors to be absorbed. One such group, so one example of accessory pigments is carotenoids. So carotenoids are an example of accessory pigments. Carotenoids such as B-carotene. So B-carotene is an example of a carotenoid. Okay? So carotenoids are examples of accessory pigments, and beta-carotene is an example of carotenoids. Carotenoids, like beta-carotene, absorb light mainly in the blue and green regions of the spectrum, while reflecting, this is very important, while reflecting mostly in the yellow and orange and red regions. Right, so let's go over that again. So the carotenoids, they mainly absorb, again, focus on the words, they absorb بيمتصوا الضوء في الblue and green regions. Blue and green regions. Chlorophyll absorbs in the blue-violet region, but carotenoids absorb in the blue and green region. And what do they reflect? If they absorb in the blue and green, what do they reflect? They reflect mostly yellow, orange, red regions. Carotenoids produce colors of carrots, of sweet potatoes. So those are some examples of plants that have the colors because of carotenoids. Chlorophylls are more abundant than other pigments. So we have more of chlorophyll than the other pigments in leaves. And thus they hide the colors of the other pigments. Since I have chlorophyll more than the other pigments, chlorophyll overtakes them. بما انه انا عندي كمية chlorophyll كتير كبيرة، فهذا بيغطي على the other pigments. فلذلك احنا بنشوف ال plants as green or the leaves as green لانه عندي chlorophyll بكمية كبيرة، فبيغطي على الالوان الثانية. However, autumn and fall in certain parts of the United States, they can bring out the shades of yellow, red, and oranges as the leaves turn colors. Because the trees start to prepare to lose their leaves before winter, the chlorophyll molecules break down. لأنه الشجر عم بيستعد إنه يخسر كل الليفز تبعونه قبل الشتاء، فالchlorophyll molecule begins to break down. Okay, this breaking down of chlorophyll reveals the colors of the other pigments. So, when chlorophyll breaks down in the leaves of some trees, the other pigments become visible. So, let's just differentiate between the chlorophyll and the accessory pigments really quickly. So, we said we have pigments, right? Pigments in the chloroplast. We discussed two types so far. And they are chlorophyll and accessory pigments. Accessory pigments. Now, what do we know about each, or what did we discuss in each? In chlorophyll, we discussed the two types, which are chlorophyll A and B. And we said that it absorbs violet and blue while reflecting green. Okay? In accessory pigments, we said in accessory pigments we have one group of accessory pigments. So one example of accessory pigments called carotenoids. So carotenoids are a group of accessory pigments. They are examples of accessory pigments. An example of a carotenoid is beta carotene. Okay? And we said they mainly absorb, so they absorb in the blue-green region, so the blue and green region, and they reflect yellow, orange, and red. Okay? We also said that chlorophyll is the most abundant, most found, the one that there is the most of, and so that's why most of the leaves are green. But in autumn, the chlorophyll breaks down in the leaves and causes other pigments to become visible. So if there's a question, what causes other pigments to become visible? The breaking down of chlorophyll allows other pigments to become visible. This ends the first part of our lesson where we introduced photosynthesis. We looked at what are the components of the first phase. We talked about the thylakoid, we talked about the stroma, and we talked about the different pigments. In the next video, we are going to complete the lesson and we're going to in detail describe what happens in phase 1, which is the light reaction. How do these pigments work? What are our products? What is this process called? and all of the information that we need to know to understand the process of the light-dependent reaction. Thank you for watching, and I hope this video helped clear up some misunderstandings with this lesson.